Hello moon babies, it's Molly. I'm really happy to be here with you today. We are going to embark on a Q&A video. I want to begin by thanking all of you for submitting your questions and contributing to the conversation. There were so many thoughtful questions that I'm not going to be able to address all of them in one video. So if I don't answer your question in this video, it will be coming in another Q&A, or it will be expanded upon and done service to in another video, because you guys asked some really interesting, meaty questions, and I would love to dive into those conversations with you. So let's get started. What gemstones and crystals do you feel most drawn to? What draws you to them? And how do you use them to enhance your practice and around your home? I'm particularly fond of purple and blue stones, my first crystal crush being amethyst. Currently, I think my favorite stone is celestite or celestite, depending on how you prefer to pronounce. I choose them mostly by color. I'm not a person who can sense crystal energy, at least not consciously. I can't claim that. I make grids. I like to decorate around my home with them. I'm particular to odd shapes. I like raw stones. I use them as emotional support reminders. There is always a crystal in my purse or in my pocket. I play with elixirs. I wear them. I like to imbue brews with them, which is something that I learned from Joey Morris, watching her channel for several years. And I love to gift them. When you feel you have a handle on the basics, where do you go to learn things that are more in-depth and complex? Interesting question. What I like to do is investigate other traditions, not necessarily to assimilate all of those ideas into my practice, but just to continue my education. And I find it really interesting to start making connections and seeing patterns between magical systems and traditions. And it will force you to ask why you're doing what you're doing. I also like to look to non-magical sources of inspiration. So natural sciences, looking at astronomy, history, nutrition, anthropology, geology, following those strands of what interests me and finding ideas that relate to my practice and create depth that way. If you're feeling stifled or stagnant, then it may also be time that you could consider passing your knowledge on and mentoring other people, because teaching is a two-way street. You can offer information to people, but it's also going to make questions arise within you that you didn't know you had, which are all roads for further investigation. You may also consider starting to build your own tradition, to begin designing and documenting your own systems. So that's a great question. Okay, what practices do you recommend for strengthening magical vision, both with eyes open and closed? I would suggest anything that uses your active imagination. So some of my favorite ways to do this are to listen to music, sometimes just laying on the floor with headphones, listening to music, and attempting to create a narrative or a landscape in my mind that moves with the composition of the music. I'll also study illustrations or paintings. I love to use kids' books for this, but really invest in studying the images and then seeing if at a later time, either on a long trip or before I'm going to bed, recalling all of the details of those spaces and seeing if I can put myself in them and move around. It's also fun to experiment with this in public. So either at your favorite tea house or where you work, try assigning colors and musical sounds or textures, tastes, feelings to what's going on around you and actively color them in. What are your favorite things to do during new and full moons? I do a ritual on both, but they are very different. So the new moon is really my get shit done magic. I will choose a theme and decide what my goals are for the next 28 days, and I will do a working around that. I'll also use that time to do a tarot forecast for myself for the entirety of that cycle. The full moon for me is dedicated to usually a meditation-based ritual where I really swim around in divine feminine energies. It's really about goddess communion for me. And I'll also spend some time checking in on how the working I did on the new moon is progressing, and then we'll do a supplementary tarot spread to continue on that journey and take a closer look at the second half of the cycle. All right. Let's see here. How did you get into witchcraft? I would love to hear your stumble upon story. Oh my. I've been stumbling for 29 years. As a kid, I played Magick all of the time. I lived on the edge of a wooded area and a marshland that was full of creeks and beautiful trees, and we spent a lot of time outside, and we played potions and tried to talk to animals and went on treasure hunts. And my mother introduced me to Arthurian legend very early on, and I think that was the spark that led me to be hungry for myth, and that has stayed with me my entire life. I ate up magical fiction. I remember The Secret of Nim, if any of you have either read or seen the animated film The Secret of Nim. I remember having an intense impact on me as a child. I began reading about witchcraft in middle school, just with books that I found at our public library. I had a little book of shadows on notebook paper and would make charms for myself and again continue to play magic out in the woods. And it wasn't really until I was in high school that the reality of witchcraft sank in for me. And I remember one of those experiences being meeting some women at a Renaissance fair who had goddess body art. And for some reason that clicked within me, saying, this is a way people live. This is a viable life choice. This isn't something that you have to just play at and be interested in. This is a way that people live. Then art school, when I went to university, my interest in myth and art and goddess spirituality and women's studies and my politics really coalesced, and I began identifying as a witch. It was also during this time that a store opened in the city I had moved to, a metaphysical shop run by some incredibly badass root workers that were open to having friendships and taught me a lot. And it was through that relationship that I decided that this wasn't something that I just wanted to be interested in and read about, but practice and live. So I feel like I've always been a witch. I'm just a really late bloomer. What do you do when you lose faith in your practice, and how do you make sure you're still on the right path? That's a doozy. This may be a deeply unsatisfying answer, but here goes. I don't know if I have faith, because faith to me feels like an unquestioning, uncompromising belief that something is the way it is because it is. And I'm willing to accept that I have no idea how any of this works. I'm going to borrow a sentiment from one of my very favorite films, Dogma, which I would highly recommend, that unwavering beliefs impede our growth, and that having ideas instead of beliefs allows us to move forward and progress and rebuild ourselves every time new information comes to light. There are things that occur in my life and in my practice that I said I would never in 100 years ever consider doing, and I do. And I believe that my practice is infinitely more rich because of it. As far as being on the right path, I think as long as we're asking questions, we're on the right path. And as much as those moments where everything disintegrates and falls apart and nothing feels real and the wind is knocked out of us are an essential part to our progress as well. And that when we feel like all hope is lost, that's the time to ask a new question. I hope that's helpful. All right. What are your personal and magical goals, both short-term and long-term? Well, personally, I am in the midst of writing a new record. The Muffin and I are looking to purchase our first home. We are planning a trip to the Redwoods, which I am extremely excited about. And I'm also planning to write more books and more workshops and make more recordings for you. Magically, I have committed to a year and a day program that I've created myself to give me some structure to my study in some ideas that I'm curious about exploring. I've also expanded my daily tarot practice. I felt like a long time I've had a very superficial understanding of the skill, and I would like to dive deeper and have a juicier grasp on that system. Also, incorporating the divine masculine in a more meaningful, intentional way in my time at the altar. What deities do you work with? For a long time, I worked with the goddess in the abstract, so sort of an overarching idea. But for the last year, I've been committed to working with the goddess Diana. So I will work specifically with her, and I will still work in the abstract with goddess. All right, you guys have lots of questions about art, about how art influences my spirituality, and does my spirituality influence my art? It absolutely does. They are inseparable in my mind. I use the same systems to create ritual as I do to create paintings or to write songs, and I believe that they are one and the same. So they are explorations of our potential, our history, our desires, our humanness, and both art and magic can be used to manifest as meditative practices, as ritual practices for healing, for banishing, for exploring, for cleansing, communing, just to have experiences. And I go super in depth into all of those ideas for those of you who are more curious about that relationship between art and magic in my ebook, Art Witch, Practical Tactics for Art Magic. So I'll leave a link for that in the down bar, but it goes into the story of how I came to art magic, what my definition of art magic and using art as a spiritual practice is, and some ideas for you to try implementing yourself. All right, how do you integrate magic throughout the day? Finding it at the altar is easy, but having it be a part of your life when you're at work, running errands, is not easy. Truer words were never spoken, right? I think, just as a side note, being in a ritual mindset all of the time is sort of an unrealistic and I think unhelpful expectation. It sort of defeats the purpose of ritual mindset being special and meaningful. But as far as magical support throughout the day, I'll use things, supplemental magic. So things like mantras or little rhymes that I've written for myself, fashion magic, color magic, carrying pictures, post-it notes with words of power or sigils, wearing a perfume with an intention, using very simple visualizations, and really just assigning meaning to everyday tasks. Okay. Ooh, here's a good one. How open are you about your witchiness with other people? I know that this is something that gets discussed often. With your family, your friends, strangers, colleagues, and if asked, how much do you reveal and why? On the whole, I'm fairly private. If you consider being openly pagan on the internet to be private. But it doesn't come up often, really. Some family members take serious issue with what I do and will attack me on the internet, but when we meet in person, pretend that it's never happened. I don't advertise it really at work or to friends. However, if you were to visit my home, it would become obvious what my inclinations are. I still think that a lot of my friends believe that it's a hobby or a fashion statement or an eccentricity because I think it frightens them to believe that someone they care about is unstable and delusional. I have some atheist friends that like to subtly jab at me, I think because it makes them feel intellectually superior. But to be honest, the inner landscape that I have cultivated is so rich that I don't care. If someone asks me about it and it comes from a place of genuine curiosity and I feel like it's going to be a constructive conversation, I'm happy to share. But I'm also equally as happy to keep parts of myself to myself. Opinions on how someone can practice magic without deity. Great question. Do you think you can? Because I think that you can. You don't really need my opinion on this. I think if you think that you can, you can. It ultimately depends on what your definition of magic is. There are some standard definitions that refer to the will and shifting of consciousness. They don't mention deity as a requirement. I think it also depends on your personal definition of deity and how that fits into your worldview and your practice. I personally do not call on Goddess to do things for me. There are people who don't believe in deity or magic who unconsciously commit acts of magic every day, all the time. So if you decide that your power comes from within you and that's how you would like to practice magic, then that's how it's going to work for you. And I have confidence that you can make that work. Okay, you guys have a lot of questions about shadow work, about how to integrate art in particular into your shadow work process. There is way too much to talk about to do that question justice here right now, so I will be making a video in the very near future full of prompts for you to use in your shadow work practice. However, if you're looking for something right now, as I'm sure all of you are aware, Kellyanne has an extensive collection of really useful shadow work instruction. Joanna DeVoe also has a lot of wonderful videos committed to shadow work. In the meantime, though, some of you were asking about books. This one is one of my favorites. It's called Tarot Shadow Work, Using the Dark Symbols to Heal. I believe that this book is out of print. However, you can find used copies on eBay and some smaller booksellers, so I would suggest this book. It's one of my favorites. So let's move along. I'd love to hear more about your musical influences and your favorite bands. Okay, lyrically, I draw from Tom Waits, Patti Smith, and Bob Dylan, particularly his works between the 1965 and 1975, sort of that holy trifecta. In high school, I was obsessed with bands like My Chemical Romance, Coheed and Cambria, The Smiths, Bikini Kill, Tsunami Bomb, The Distillers, Joan Jett, the Dresden Dolls were a favorite. Currently, I'm listening to a lot of Thin Lizzy and The Darkness and Foxy Shazam. I'm also inspired by Pat Benatar and Wendy O, Iggy Pop, and Meatloaf. I apologize for nothing. When will your band tour Canada? Well, we are getting passports this year, so we'll see how that goes. Okay. Do you ever experience embarrassment when discussing your beliefs? I mean, as an intelligent person, have you ever had a moment where you question the validity of your practice? And if yes, how do you combat those thoughts and emotions, and how do you keep faith in a world where science rules? This is a wonderful question. There's a lot to unpack here. So, do I experience embarrassment? Not so much embarrassment as a vulnerability. Do I question it? Constantly. How do I combat that? I combat that because I believe that there's more than one way of knowing and experiencing this world. Science proves that there's all sorts of stuff going on that we are oblivious to. There are things that my cats can see and hear that I will never experience. So it teaches me that my limited experience is not the only truth in this world. I don't believe that the scientific and the spiritual are at odds. So as a pagan that looks to nature as a source of wisdom, understanding our relationship with the planet, and invested interest in environmentalism, the usefulness of psychodrama, a deeper relationship with the planet and cycles, our instinctual need for community. None of those things are at odds with science. Science and magic have an interesting parallel history. They ask a lot of the same questions. Why are we here? What are we doing here? Where are we going? How does this work? And science leads us to solutions and inspires possibility. Both science and spirituality have a desire to have a deeper understanding of the mysteries. And I'm not sure what's more magical than that. So that's how I live in a world harmoniously with science and spirituality. All right, our last question for today is, I'd like to know what you think are the best ways of affecting positive change in the wider world with magic. What a great question. My suggestion is to go within, to start with the self. You are the only being that you have power over. Do ritual. Do ritual for accountability. Do ritual to overcome fear, an obstacle. Do ritual to dedicate yourself to learning. Meditate on the seat of your personal power to enhance your efficacy. Service is an offering, and you can use it to uplift people around you. And if you're unsure of how to move about in the world, ask for help, and aid will come to you in some form. Aid will come to you. Yes, make the candles. Yes, create the altars. Yes, write the invocations. Use them as a focal point, as a means of support for your actions in the wider world. Now, the world, with the capital W, is huge and overwhelming. But I think it's important for us to take a step back and remember that our friends, our partners, our households, our work colleagues, our book clubs, our libraries, our YouTube channels, our youth centers, our local representatives, the parking lot where we work, our wallet, all of those things are also of the world. And we have impact in those places. You have skills, you have talents, you have resources to offer. Use your ethics as a map to guide you. Everyone has the power to bless someone. That's magic. I actually recently wrote a blog post on this question, offering some ideas on how you can use magic to affect the larger world. And I would love to hear your ideas about that as well. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening to me talk about how I feel about the world. And for contributing to this conversation. I appreciate you all so much, and I appreciate you for watching. So until we speak again, which will be very soon, witch on, witch boldly, and be well, moon babies. Bye-bye. And I'll be back when the day is new, with more witchy ideas for you. You'll have magic stuff you'll want to talk about, and I will too.